Welcome to the Generation F podcast. This is Isaiah speaking with a bonus episode. I have today with me our guest for the evening. His name is Jayce. He's actually the younger gentleman that helped me troubleshoot the episode 10's issue with not realizing how to operate a mic. So we have him in the flesh. He's going to go through some of his testimony, very similar to Yuri's episode back in, I believe, episode 7. We don't have Phil or Maddie on tonight, so it will just kind of be me and Jayce going back and forth. A couple things that we want to kind of cover, in this episode is where Jayce comes from, some things that he's kind of wrestled with, trying to find his own faith, as a younger youth in this generation, but then using some scripture that I have prepared for this episode just to kind of create some more questions or answer some of the things that will be talked about this evening. So without further ado, Jayce, how are you this evening?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Very good, very good. If you want to give the audience just like a background, let the audience kind of get to know where you come from, what are some things that kind of brought you to this path, if you will.
All right. I'm 23. I've always lived in PA. I would say I come from a pretty normal family. Dad, mom, two brothers. I have an older brother and a little brother. Did not grow up religious at all. I actually remember being a pretty arrogant atheist along with my older brother. I remember him. This is like kind of the first thing I remember about religion. We went to my green pop-up's funeral and we either went to church before or after, I forget what it was, but I remember all my cousins, they all did their communion. They all grew up Catholic, and me and my older brother were the only ones that weren't kind of forced into it. My mom and dad just kind of let us figure it out ourselves, and I remember going up to the altar to take the communion, and I, like, put my hand out wrong, and I guess it was the priest, I'm not sure. He kinda was like, "What are you doing?" And I must have been 4 or 5 years old at the time, and it was super embarrassing, and everybody was looking at me, and I just had no idea what it was. I put my hand out wrong. I didn't take the cracker in the right way. So I kinda at that point, I kinda, like, shut it out of my life, and I remember my older brother telling me he's a pretty smart dude. He's a little, we grew up super atheist, me and him. Not my mom and dad, but I remember him telling me we were talking about the Bible, and he was telling me that religion was a way to separate the entire world. And I remember just carrying that with me my entire life. Not my entire life, but up until about ninth or 10th grade. So all the way through middle school. So yeah, that's pretty much my background with religion. But as far as me as a person, I would say I was a little troubled growing up. I was a naughty kid, if you will. That's what my mom would say. I would have a good year and then I'd have a bad year. I'd have a good year and then I'd have a bad year. But in 5th grade is when I started taking psychiatric meds for the first time. 'Cause they always said that I would have ADHD, so I was super hyper. I do still think I have it to this day, but I started taking Concerta, and that's when stuff really started to go downhill. I started, my confidence was drained a little bit from having to take this stuff, and also hearing all the time that you're not going to be able to pay attention. You need this, and I just remember taking that stuff and throwing it down the sink. So I began in trouble throwing it down the sink. Every now and then, my mom would catch me, or I'd get a call home, and she'd be like, "What's going on?" And I would just tell her I'm not taking it anymore. So yeah, I mean that pretty much sums up how I grew up, just being troubled and call homes every day. Not every day, but quite frequently.
Between fifth and ninth grade, was there specific instances in your life that escalated to create, a further separation? Maybe not even just with faith, but just with reality. Like, what were some things that happened that caused you to get to a place where you maybe found that you were in need of something a little bit more, outside of the physical realm?
Well, switched out of so I guess I should start from 6th grade because that's when I had a little bit more friends, but I was still super troubled, and a lot of my good friends that I'm still friends with to this day would their moms were calling other moms telling them, like, "Don't let your kid hang out with Jayce. He's gonna be a bad kid." I remember a teacher in I won't say the name of the school, but I remember her sitting down with my teacher and me this is a teacher I didn't even have, and I just remember her asking me, like, "Do your parents even have jobs?" I remember telling my mom that she called the school, and she was not happy with that. I moved to middle school, so I started integrating with the other school because they, like, joined schools to go to the middle school. So I started to get around more kids, and I felt like it was a fresh start. Like, 7th grade, I was in, like, a pretty normal friend group. I was friends with the athletes, but I had this one friend that at the end of 7th grade, he hit a vape, and everybody it kinda, like, split the friend group in half because everyone was like, "I don't wanna hang out with that kid. He's bad news," and I just felt like I had no interest in that stuff at all at the time, but I felt like I wanted to be a good friend, so I stuck by his side. I kinda lost all my friends, and I would say I started hanging out with at the time, it was probably not the best crowd. They weren't really bad kids, but, they were being stupid, so 8th grade was actually when I started being dumb, and, I started smoking weed, started vaping, started drinking. I wouldn't say it was an everyday thing, but it was just something that we look forward to on the weekends, and it kinda started taking the fun out of, being a normal kid because it was always like, "When are we gonna get high? When are we gonna get high?" Which is crazy to think about because I have a little brother that's in 8th grade now, and I just can't even imagine him doing that stuff, so it was crazy to think about my young brain indulging in that stuff, but ninth grade, I had a little friend group that's what we did. We got high and they were a bunch of skateboarders, so we would just chill outside of abandoned stores, they would skate, and I would just sit in the back and get high. Ninth grade, towards the end of the year, I would say it was in, like, March or April, we made the smart idea to buy some psychedelics. I'm not sure how, I really I've thought about this a lot, how we made that decision. It was probably from watching YouTube videos, just, like, YouTube videos about psychedelics, which is crazy, but we all took it. It was, like, 5 of us, we all took some, and that's when stuff started getting weird for all of us, and we all kinda fell backwards.
Leading up into that point, was there something that you feel that you were searching for at a younger age or something that you're running away from? Because when I was younger, one of the reasons why I started to use and also just kind of hang out with different crowds of people was looking for role models or father figures or people in my life that weren't present, trying to kind of figure out like, how do I make up for what I don't have? So, do you feel like that was something that you had, or were you just peer pressured and just kind of experiencing that?
Honestly, I don't know because, like, I do come from a very normal family, like, my mom and my dad are nurses, my older brother's a nurse. My older brother's a great student, good role model, like, I didn't have any bad role models in my life. My mom's side of the family is pretty troubled, a lot of drug addiction and jail time and stuff like that. So I'm not sure if it's genetic, but I guess I just felt like something was missing, and the friend group that I did end up going into, like, a lot of them did not have a father figure in the household. I'm not sure why because, my dad is a great dad, and I've never felt like I haven't had that, but I guess from, being excluded out of, many friend groups for how I acted, I don't think I was a bad kid, but, like, I was just not the kid that you would want your kid to hang out with. Yeah, I didn't take school serious, I was always joking around, so I understand why, but I guess from being excluded out of all of those groups, I felt some type of way towards, like, normalcy, because I was hanging out with, a lot of athletes, and they were too normal for me, which is weird to say, but I guess I started hanging out with this new group, and my mom would call us the misfits. I guess it was just appealing to have, like, the freedom, 'cause my mom and dad were very on my case all the time. You know, they weren't if they would drop me off at a house, they'd have to go walk up to the door, talk to the parents, like normal parent stuff that you should be doing, but, once I got around these kids, they had the leash off. It was just free reign, just running around town and doing whatever we wanted, so I guess when I got that taste of freedom, I just had to run with it.
The first time you were going into psychedelics, and again, you don't have to go into specific details. I think the audience can kind of gather a lot from general descriptions, but where do you kind of see that escalating into a spirituality or some of the practices that you may have had? If you could just kind of paint that picture.
Yeah, I started getting into, like, a niche part of YouTube that would talk about drugs. I would always listen to this recovering addict that I can see now that he was kinda glorifying it. He called himself a poly poly addict or something, I forget, like, multiple drugs. He would talk about multiple types of drugs, and I just started watching all these videos on it and, like, getting into the psychedelic realm of, like, the '60s, and they would talk about meeting entities and all this crazy stuff, and I was hooked on it, and it kinda just led me down a spiral. 'Cause I've always been interested in, like, old religion and the old civilizations, but I was an atheist, like, I did not believe that anything in that realm existed at all. So I was, indulging in it. I would say I did it about 10 or 11 times in 1 year, which is crazy because I was, like, 15 years old. I didn't realize that I was doing a lot of damage to my brain, but these YouTube videos kinda enhanced, like, my interest in that realm. So I started just diving down that rabbit hole, and then COVID was around the corner that next year. I stopped doing that stuff 'cause it scared me. I remember just freaking out in my room, and I wanted to run into my dad's room to tell him, like, "This is what I'm on, and I wanna go to the hospital." I was freaking out. So I ended up just, like, walking around the neighborhood and sweating it off, but it lasts, like, 6 or 7 hours, so I was freaking out for a while, but after that, I was like, "I'm never doing that again." That scared me. But then COVID hit that March, and then I just had free reign, and that's when stuff really got bad.
Do you feel like you were trying to look for certain like answers or things that, maybe, you didn't even think to ask before? Like was there something like pulling you in or promising you information that you felt like you weren't receiving from society?
Not yet. I would say COVID is when that stuff started really hitting me when I guess I had my what I called back then, like, my awakening. But during that time, I guess it was, like, opening my eyes that, like, there is something else out there, like, I really didn't believe that the brain just spawned that crazy stuff in your head, like deities and all this stuff that I was hearing. So I guess it kinda opened the spiritual door, but no, I didn't have any awakening.
I want to put a pin in that conversation because we are going to kind of transition to that. But there is a scripture that I have prepared for tonight that kind of segues pretty well to that idea. It's more so talking about like the invisible qualities in reality that might draw us to them because they are things that God put in our hearts to search for, right? So we have here in the book of Romans, right? Romans is towards the end of the Bible. It's like one of the last few books, really, written by Paul. What I have is Romans chapter 1. It's going to be just 6 verses 20 through 26. And I'm reading this in my children's Bible. So if you're reading at home, some of the words might not line up all the way. So we have here it says, and this is Paul basically talking to the people of Rome, right? The church in Rome. He says, there are things about God that people cannot see, his eternal power and all the things that make him God. But since the beginning of the world, those things have been easy to understand. They are made clear by what God has made. So people have no excuse for the bad things they do. They knew God, but they did not give glory to God and they did not thank him. Their thinking became useless. Their foolish minds were filled with darkness. They said they were wise, but they became fools. they gave up the glory of God who lives forever. They traded that glory for the worship of idols made to look like earthly people. They traded God's glory for things that look like birds, animals, and snakes. So God left them to follow their evil desires, and they made one another's bodies impure by what they did. I'm going to kind of stop there, because one of the things that I kind of see here in other translations, you'll see Paul talk about people worshiping the creatures, not the creator, right?
Yep.
Or in some other translations, it will talk about the idea that in the New Age or just spiritualism, even in my opinion, psychedelic practices become like a New Age spiritualism because it attracts a lot of things from different sources, right? You're looking for ascension, you're looking for these different concepts to kind of gravitate to that explain the things that you see and experience on certain drugs. But, we're constantly trying to replicate things that are in our heart that are put there for a specific reason. They're put there as a drawing mechanism for us to go and wrestle with God and try and develop that faith. What do you feel when you hear that scripture, Jace? Is there something that resonates with you or
Yeah, I think now that I have a more mature mindset on it, that I could sit back and see from overhead that, like, this is the tool that God was using to bring me to him. Like, the group that I was around and what I was doing, I mean, it completely broke me, so I did end up after I stopped doing that stuff, I this is what drew me to, like, self-progression. Yeah, it was the enemy, but God was letting it God was letting it fall through for a reason. I see why now. I didn't at the time, but I do now, definitely.
Yeah, and that's an interesting distinction that a lot of people may not quite understand, but there are a lot of instances in the New Testament, but also in the Old where we are allowed to go through things, to experience hardships for us later to come to the realization that we need God, right? So it isn't uncommon for us to have this notion that even though you probably entered an even harder time, it was actually mercy, right? It was a way of you to go through this next chapter that you're probably going to talk about, and it was enough to break you enough to realize the things that were actually absent in your life.
Yeah, I would say around ninth grade is when I started getting depressed for the first time. I had, like, no idea what that was. I would get sad, but, like, 2 weeks just laying in bed, not being able to get out. I had no idea what was going on. I guess my brain was definitely reliant on weed for happiness for a while. So when I was kind of in, like, a broken place after I decided, "Well, I'm not gonna do this anymore," and then I had that first year of high school. So I knew, like, what darkness was, but after, COVID hit, then I was just home alone all the time. I wasn't going to school at all. I kinda just threw the dream away of living with my brother, 'cause, I'm not good at online school. I did have good grades that first year of high school, but once the online school started, I didn't show up to class. I didn't log on to the team stuff, which is like an online school classroom. I wasn't going to that at all, so I kinda was just throwing all my dreams out. I wasn't physically active anymore because there was no sports going on, and then my cousin moved in with us, so that was even more just smoking weed all the time, but doing nothing. I got caught a few times smoking in the house, and my mom and dad were just getting sick of it, so that's when I started running away. That's when I would say stuff picked up a lot. I was running away to I had I would say a new friend group at the time that was, like, maybe, like, 30 people. It was a lot of people. I started hanging out with the kids from the other high schools, and a lot of those I would say it was more of the girls. They were, like, wrapped up into the social media, new age religion that they were pumping through our feeds, and, they always had, like, crystals, and they were reading tarot cards, all this stuff, so I was like, "What?" I thought it was stupid when I first came in, but I remember just kinda verbalizing, like, what I was going through, like, saying that, stuff was getting dark, but one of them said, "Everything happens for a reason," and I don't know why, but it hit me, like, so hard. it sounds like a corny quote, but like that's when I found that there was, like, a higher power because I knew that the things in my life were it was like a puppet master was pulling strings, and I finally was realizing that, like, the people that I was meeting, who I was around, that I was learning more about myself, and that's when I started, talking to at the time, I called it the universe, but that's when I started, like, getting into self-progression, actually trying to make myself better. I'd say that was the turning point.
Yeah, during that period of time, you were wrestling with the idea of there being a God. Was there ever a time that you felt you had spirituality, or was there a practice?
I guess I started just, like, seeing things in a different lens, like, I would I remember my friend, telling me, he's like, "Bro, you're super lazy. You don't do anything. You need to start doing stuff." And old me would've, got really aggressive over that, but I understood now that, like, God or whatever it was at the time was, like, this is its way of talking to me, which sounds stupid, but the conversations that I would have, I knew that they were pulling me towards something now. Just like self-progression. I guess I didn't give the best example, but the conversations that I would have, I knew that they were leading me towards something.
When did you feel things stop satisfying you with how you were organizing faith? You said there was this period of self progression and things, influential people that said motivating things that got you to the next step. But what was the time that you actually came to know who Jesus was, or even just started to question Jesus as God or the possibility of God?
I would say it was a long time after that. Like, I had this new age I would call it new age self-progression phase where, like, I was obsessed with getting better and ascending is what I called it at the time. And I had, like, all this artwork on my wall, like yin and yang, like, learning about that stuff, and remember having this poster of I think it's Ganesha, the Indian elephant god, and, like, getting into all of that stuff, that, like, this is all these religions are wrapped in one, and Buddha, learning about Buddha, and I was just feeling like when I was nicer to people and I carried clean energy that I was getting it back, and I was, like, pretty obsessed with karma and just being nice and just trying to be a better person all around, being nicer, carrying myself in a better way, and I would see the progression in my life.
What you have is basically this idea of like the ascended masters, right? Where you have like Jesus, Buddha, Ganesh, like all these different deities that have existed throughout time that become this, hierarchy. What brought you to that idea? Was that something you saw on like YouTube, or were you reading something? What kind of created that idea in your head?
Well, these people that were around were, like, I would call them hippies, and they were, like, super into drugs and doing that type of stuff. I don't know, they'd always say stuff about the universe, and I kinda just I'm a researcher, so once I heard that stuff, I kinda just went down my own rabbit holes and was, like, learning about that stuff. I knew that there was a higher power out there, so I was looking all over the place, all different religions, and, learning a bunch of stuff. I'm not sure what happened, but it was a New Year's Eve, I think 2021 is when I was angry, I was, like, super depressed, and I knew at the time that God was real. I didn't think I started calling him God at that time, but I just remember being super depressed and just looking up at the sky, and I was just, cursing God out, saying crazy stuff, and I was like, I'm in control now." And from that point on, I tried to become my own God, and I was, like, super arrogant, and I just started doing a lot of wrong things. And then I would say I got past the, free spirit friend group and started hanging out with some not very good people. I was just like, I was fighting with my parents a lot, running away. I mean, I must have ran away for 4 or 5 days at a time, multiple times, every single month, just running away all the time, just wanted to be out all day, doing whatever I wanted. And, I started to hang out with the wrong group of people, and I ended up getting arrested for the first time in March 2021, and I kinda just I got put on probation, and I kinda was just getting into this new crowd. I kept ascending crowds. I kept getting worse and worse. So when I went into probation, I got put into this drug group. And I started meeting a whole bunch of people that were, like, really broken. I mean, I was broken at the time, but, I was coming from a semi-normal family, but, these kids were sons of drug addicts, daughters of drug addicts, sons of their dads doing a long, long time in prison. I was just getting around this different mindset, and it was dark. Like, these people were dark, the stuff that they were doing, and I would say I was completely godless at this time. I was kinda just doing whatever I wanted, hanging out with the wrong crowd, still smoking weed every day, but not really doing drugs. I dropped all the new age stuff, I would say. I wasn't I never really got into, like, crystals or anything or, like, tarot cards, but I would watch, like, YouTube videos on it. I thought it was super cool, but, I just had no interest in self-progression. I was just diving down, and I knew I was diving down. Like, I knew that's why I think I got punished so much more for the things I was doing because I knew that God was real, and I knew that I was, like, kinda spitting in his face. But I was okay with it, like, I didn't care, I felt like the things I was going through, I shouldn't have been going through. I remember, like, crying out like, having a real bad day and just crying out to my mom, be like, "Why is God doing this to me? There's no reason for him to be doing this to me, I don't do anything wrong to him," which is not true. I was not moving right at all, but I blamed him for everything. I was super mad at God all the time, and, I kinda just carried that with me at school. I felt like I had like a dark cloud around me at all the time, and, my friends would tell me that at school, like, "Dude, you gotta wipe that face off, like, you look evil." Started fighting, and I got in a few fights at school, and, I was, like, obsessed with, being bad and, like, keeping people away from me through the energy that I was projecting off to everybody. Like, I felt like it was my shield, like, being super negative, and, I kinda just progressed until eventually I left my high school and I started going to an alternative school, and it just kinda kept tumbling, and, I did graduate. Meanwhile, this whole time I was on probation for, I would say, like, 3.5 years. So I did have my probation officer was great, my counselor was great, I had a good team around me that, they tried super hard to get me to do well, but, I'm a good talker. I would be doing stuff bad at night, and then when they'd see them, I would charm them and make them laugh so they didn't think anything was going on. And, my, my cousin got out of jail after a while, and I started hanging out with him, my older cousin, who I got super close with, and he was a Christian. He started telling me all this, stuff about the Bible and saying God more around me, just saying the word God. And I started to care more about doing right for God. I think he got out around March, but, stuff was catching up to me. I was super depressed leaving my old school. I wasn't allowed to go to prom because I was on an ankle monitor. I wasn't allowed to go out of my house or do anything fun. I remember they had like senior week planned for my old high school. I wasn't allowed to go to that either. So I was just like, and also being super negative. The last time that I was at school, I didn't have very many friends that I carried with. Kids I've known for like 6 or 7 or 8 years at that time. I wasn't talking to anymore because they didn't want anything to do with me because I was, a criminal. So I was super depressed, super alone. And then April, like March to April, I would say I got super into drinking. I do it every single night. I ended up I was taking these anxiety meds at the time, these psychiatric meds. And, yeah, I took a bunch of them out of like a crazy spurt of just anger and rage. But I was also drunk. So I had pretty significant seizure, and I was out for, like, 3 days. They took me down to the hospital. I was, like I think I got I'm not sure if I got charcoal or my stomach pumped, but I was out for, like, 3 days, and, yeah, I popped my shoulders out, both of my shoulders out in that time, but I was so unconscious that I didn't know. So my shoulders were fully popped out for, like, 3 days, and, they had no idea. I, like, woke up from my slumber, my 3-day binge of being asleep, and I kept telling my mom, like I was like, "Do you see anything wrong with my shoulders?" I had, like, a huge back. Like, I'm a skinny guy, but my back was, like, fully pumped out. And I was like, "Mom, like, do you feel this?" I remember she was, like, massaging my back, and she kept calling the nurse down. She's like, "Something's wrong with him." So they gave me an X-ray, and both my shoulders were popped out of place for 72 hours straight. And, I just remember waking up and, like, all my family was around, and I remember my cousin being there, and he's like, "What are you doing, dude? Like, why would you not tell me?" I was like, "I don't know, man." And, I got really close with him after that because I was like, "Man, like, none of my friends showed up. Nobody was there. Nobody really realized I was gone, but my older cousin realized, and the one that was talking about God." And I kinda just fully towards
It
him. I graduated school, and I was off to the races from there. I was just hanging out with him all the time, and he was kinda putting it in my head. That happened, like, the whole seizure thing happened in April, and, my mom and dad were just like, "What? Like, what? Why did you do that?" 'Cause it was like it was a pretty crazy time for my family. I was kinda getting, like, a little bit more attention at that time from them because they were just they were scared. They were like they didn't want me to go off the deep end. They knew that stuff was, like, super serious now, and I'm also leaving a lot of stuff out that I was doing at that time. But, actually, the day that I graduated, I actually got kicked out of my house, and I went and lived with that cousin at my aunt's house. So I was with him 24/7 all the time, going to work. He's a barber. I was going to work with him, just hanging out with all his friends, and they were all Christians. So the seed was being planted. He was telling me his own testimony, and he's had a pretty crazy life. He's been all over the country, and he was just telling me everything that he was talking about is connecting it to God. And he was, giving me Bible verses and stuff, which I didn't really care about at the time, but I was, like, looking around like, "Man, I do not wanna be like this anymore." But, I saw the bridges that I burnt down with everybody. I really didn't have that many friends at this time because I was just angry and violent all the time. And, my mom and dad obviously didn't want me around because, I did something pretty crazy the first day of summer. I don't know why. I guess I was just, like, glad for school to be over, but I did something pretty crazy, and they didn't want me around. So, I was off to the races. I was by myself. I didn't plan on sad to say, but I did not plan on living past 20 at that time. I was like I think I told enough funny jokes that, my funeral would be pretty fun. I would have, like, visions of sitting over my funeral, and this is crazy. I would have, like, overhead visions. I guess it was, like, dreams, but it was like a daydream, and I would be over my funeral, and I'd be watching everybody mourn. I'd be like, "Man, he was a pretty funny guy, like, remember when he did this and that?" And I just felt like at that point that I did enough funny stuff that I would have a good funeral. So, that was my mindset at the time of how I left, but, I came back into their house, and that's when I really started caring a lot and finding God. Yeah, one day I'm not sure what it was, but, I actually started watching these YouTube videos of this fitness influencer that he would, like, talk about building a strong mindset, like, how important it is to do your maybe the wrong word, but, like, morning rituals, like, waking up at a certain time, eating at this time, going to the gym at this time, so I was structuring my days out, and he would always say stuff about the universe, what you give it will give it back to you. At this time, I was not calling it the universe, so I was just saying God, and that's kinda how it started. I was getting into God more, and then I just decided to make the weird decision of going to church one day. And I walked in 20 minutes late because I had no idea when it started. I've never been to church in my life, and the pastor came up to me and he's like, "What are you doing here?" I was like, "I'm trying to find God." And he's like, "Oh yeah?" Like, he gave me my first Bible and he sat me down. I kinda just told him the same story I just told you. And I gave him, like, my testimony on, like, what I was looking for. I knew that I was alive for a certain reason. I probably should have died when I got that seizure. I mean, at least that's what they said. So I knew that I was given a second chance for a reason. I was kind of obsessed with death for a while. So after I realized that I was given a second chance at life, I just cared more about what I could do with my life. So I was always thanking God, and this pastor actually, he gave me a Bible. He wrote a bunch of stuff in it on like how I could, do better just reading my word. And that following week, I went into the Bible study, and I actually met two of my teachers from my alternative school, and it made me feel like super comfortable. It was like a non-denominational church, just a regular Christian church, and they got me into it from that point on, and I was just going nonstop for a while, and then I picked up kickboxing. That's where I met you, and we started talking about God, and that's, I think, really when I met you. That's when I like started to really understand. I would say, I'm learning, but you kind of were like an experienced Christian that wasn't, the pastor was like an old man. He was like a boomer. No offense to Phil. Sorry, Phil. But he was like a boomer, so it was like hard to relate with this guy. Like he was in like an old school Christian, but once I met like a younger, millennial Christian that I also had the same passion, with kickboxing in, I was learning new stuff, and yeah, that's when it really took off. I would say, I do it every day. I try to do something every day. I try to read the word, or I'm constantly thanking God. And just recently, you told me, talk to God like He's my friend. So I've been doing that a lot more. I complain to God. I talk to God. I tell Him what's good. I tell Him what's bad. And yeah, I also picked up the Bible study once I started going to college. There was like a little Bible study group, and I remember getting done with my
Yeah.
anatomy class, and it was like very very strange. This is something that I would do when I was in New Age. I'd be like, "Universe, give me a sign," and I would see, some numbers or something, and I was like really into numerology. But at this time, I was like, "God, give me a sign. Tell me what I can do between these next two classes to get closer to you." And I looked at the wall, like right on the dot. I looked at the wall, and it was the poetry group. As usual, I walked in late. And they're like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "I'm here to find God."
Obviously, we're not too far removed in age, but there is a little bit of a generational divide, with that idea of new age and also with the idea of me talking to you, having our deep conversations. What are the differences between your generation battling with the new age and maybe my generation a little bit older? You and I are very similar in the sense that we got into the new age from psychedelics. My goal was to pry open my third eye, it was to ascend. Concepts that were taught by mystics to commune with things that we had no business communing with, right? And to someone who doesn't understand the psychedelic culture, they would just be like, "What are you guys talking about?" But that's the interesting thing with psychedelics and spirituality is they almost speak the same language, right? So if you have like a Christian or a Catholic and they have this like religious jargon, well, psychonauts and people who are really invested in drug use of that kind also have like a very specific language where they're trying to almost experience something very supernatural and something very spiritual, right? But obviously, when I was younger, we didn't have TikTok. We did have YouTube, but it was just kind of starting out. A lot of these things were motivated by music and certain artists or books or maybe even movies and philosophers or you name it, things that were less constantly indoctrinating us. Like I didn't have to open up my phone and constantly see something telling me that I should think this way. I had to go search for that thought. I had to go search for this new idea, this new ideology.
Well, I would say, with the phones. they don't say Jesus. The rappers, the TikTok influencers, the YouTubers, they never say Jesus. A lot of them are, it feels like they're put in the position and, it feels like that's on their contract, just to not say that stuff. But they do talk about the new age a lot. Like a lot of the music, it has a lot of new age spirituality stuff and the movies that we grow up with. It's a lot of obsession with the old gods and it's just like the indoctrination with the phones and the feed on TikTok or Instagram or whatever it is. It's a lot of it has to do with drugs. They doing drugs. We're sold a lot of degeneracy, and there's really nothing pointing back to God. It feels like like I heard on the other podcast, like Maddie talking about hookup culture, and that hit Gen Z very hard. I know you talked about how drug addiction hit your generation hard. It's like they'll push everything to Gen Z that is, immoral, that leads you away from God, degeneracy, and the stuff that goes on with, the people that we all look up to, the people that are famous, that are on our phones. And it's just everything is immoral. And it's kind of, if you're on your phone all day and you're super involved in Hollywood, you're not going to find God because, his presence is not there. I would say just the influence of having a phone in my hand. I've had a phone in my hand since maybe 5th grade. So, sometimes I feel like my phone more than my actual family until, I started coming around. I actually started listening to them. My phone was raising me for a while. I could actually say that I probably got into psychedelics from the music, from hearing about drugs all the time with all the rappers that I listened to. mm, to the point where, I wasn't listening to my mom and dad anymore. I was listening to these people that I thought were like edgy and, outside of society, that they were like cool. Really, at the end of the day, they were just, doing a lot of degenerate stuff. And, there was no fingers pointing to God. I just felt like that was something that I had to find on my own through following that stuff for a while, feeling the darkness, and then finally just striving for something that I felt like would actually work, which was God. I think God is doing great work in my generation. Like, even like I said earlier, like even if he's using the enemy for a little bit to pull you closer to God. Like, I feel like with Hollywood, spirituality is a big trend. It's, pretty well known. I barely know anybody who doesn't believe in something, especially it definitely hit the girls a lot harder with the spirituality stuff. They're all wearing their little evil eye necklaces, or they have the tarot cards, or they have the crystals, or whatever it may be. But with the men, I would say, at least, in my area, I feel like the more that the influencers that we follow about, like they're pushing a new group of influencers that talk about the degeneracy and like realizing like, wait, like this is this is immoral. So everybody, it feels like the kids my age are looking for something more, and they don't like the spirituality, and they're turning to Christianity. It seems like there's a huge boom of Christianity right now, especially after Charlie Kirk was somebody that my whole generation saw on their feed every single day. And when he got assassinated, it was like a massive boom, which sounds crazy, but it was like a massive boom with, it seemed like everybody wanted to become a Christian after that. At least the boys that I know that are my age, that's what it felt like. Everybody's looking for something. They're realizing that like Hollywood's kind of falling down. People are starting to realize, that it's immoral and they're looking for something else. I think that, God's really doing numbers in my generation specifically.
I find it very important for me to have this dialogue and have all these different generations have a voice because we don't have that bridge anymore. We don't have the ability for a boomer to understand what a Gen Z would experience on their phone. Like, it's a completely different world. I'll share something with Phil. So he's starting to see these things and he's just like, holy cow, like, where have I been? Right. The relationship that I've had with Phil is very interesting because I'm almost giving him this technological awakening in a way where he's starting to see things in a different light because he's no longer seeing things from the lens of a boomer who just kind of, does what they do day in and day out. And like there's a little bit more of an interaction with the world around him. And I find that very interesting because then, he helps me understand the mindset of someone who really hasn't had to change anything about what they've believed in for decades. So it's paradigm shifting. It's just kind of fascinating for me to have these conversations with people because both sides don't understand each other, right?
Yeah, it's like, it feels like social media has become a religion in itself. Like, a lot of my generation will gravitate towards one person that's, has like a strong energy to them, and they're literally like rinse and repeating everything they say, like whether it's a political influencer or a fitness guy or an athlete, like they become obsessed with these people. And I'm sure it's like hard for people like Phil to understand that there's people who go to church on their phone. I go to Bible study, and we'll spend an hour on one chapter in the book of John. But then I'll be watching, like, Instagram Reels or something, and, I'll learn, like, 30 things at once. After being on my phone for so long, it hooks my brain in a different way than sitting down in Bible study and learning about one chapter for an hour straight. But, I do think it's, important to get a mix of both because I would say at Bible study, we do it in, like, a more, you know maybe it sounds wrong, but, like, a more traditional boomer way. We sit down and we sit and we actually, like, talk to each other and go through it slowly and connect it to the world at the end of the session. But on my phone, it's just you're hearing 30 different opinions from 30 different people. You're seeing your friends like it, so you're like, "Oh, this is what this person thinks," like, and you don't think it has an impact on you, but you put yourself into a little group, it feels like it's turned into its own religion. One of the things that I struggle with, and I know a lot of other Gen Z people struggle with, is, like, the way that we learn, like, that fast-paced, quick information, it's a lot more intriguing. Having the phone in my hand and always having access to it, like, I'm not gonna lie, I'd rather watch The Chosen TV show than pick up my Bible. There's more appealing YouTube videos than me to watch than me just sitting down and reading the Bible, which is sad to say, but, like, that's a problem that my generation struggles with. Like, we're so used to fast-paced information. Sorry for the viewers, I'm a little all over the place. I can sense it. Hope Isaiah will have me back on. I can come a little bit more prepared, a little bit more structured. Yeah, I just wish I had more of like a "That's Jesus" moment because, I do have, like, a very, dark, emotional past that is, like, would shock a lot of people, especially people that know me. But, I wish I just had, like, a moment where I could be like, "And then I found Jesus, and this is what Jesus did for me, and this is how." I probably could have talked about how I always felt like my heart was, like, empty, but when I felt the Holy Spirit for the first time, it was like an explosion in my heart. Like, it just felt like that was my center ground. And honestly, since I felt that, since I think probably since I went to the church for the first time and met that pastor, and I remember him telling me, like, "You're a brother now," and, like, feeling, like, the love from, like, 30 different, like, random old people, old women, old men. I think I coulda just went into more detail about how much that changed my life and how, like, sturdy I am now. Like, I don't feel like I'm missing anything now. I was literally, like, 4 or 5 years ago, I was, like, a evil, ghetto, like, mean, and, like, yeah, I'm a small guy, I am, but, like, I was, like, super violent, which is crazy, but, like, now I'm, like, a big smiler. I'm super nice, I'm always cracking jokes. I'm pretty I'm loud in the rooms, but I don't think people are at the gym, like the MMA gym. Like I really don't think they would recognize me 4 or 5 years ago.